My daughter-in-law screamed, "Your dead mother's junk isn't worth the box it's stored in." She was holding a 150-year-old emerald necklace worth more than her entire house. I smiled and said nothing, yet. My name is Evelyn Hartwell, and I'm 67 years old. I live in a small, picturesque town called Millbrook in northern Vermont, where the maple trees turn brilliant shades of red and gold every autumn, and everyone knows everyone else's business. My little white cottage sits at the end of Elm Street, with a wraparound porch and flower gardens that I tend myself despite my arthritis. From the outside, my life looks simple and unremarkable, exactly the way I prefer it. I work part-time at the Millbrook Public Library, a job I took 3 years ago after my husband Harold passed away from a sudden heart attack. The library work gives me purpose and keeps me connected to my community without being overwhelming. I help patrons find books, organize community reading programs, and maintain the local history collection that includes photographs and documents dating back to when Millbrook was first settled in the 1800s. The job pays modestly, but combined with Harold's pension and our savings, it's enough to maintain my comfortable but unpretentious lifestyle. Most people in Millbrook see me as a quiet widow who lives frugally, drives a 15-year-old Toyota Camry, and shops at the discount grocery store with coupons. I wear simple clothes from department stores, keep my gray hair in a practical bob, and live in the same house Harold and I bought 42 years ago when we were newlyweds. My neighbors are kind, but probably assume I'm struggling financially, especially since I declined to join the expensive country club that many of the other retirees in town frequent. What they don't know, what almost no one knows, is that I come from a family with a very different kind of wealth, the kind that doesn't announce itself with flashy displays or designer labels. My great-great-grandmother, Isabella Morrison, was the daughter of a Scottish gem merchant who immigrated to America in the 1870s with a collection of precious stones that he had acquired through decades of careful trading in Europe and South America. Isabella inherited not just his business acumen, but also his most prized possessions, a collection of emeralds that had been gathered from Colombian mines when such stones were rarer and more valuable than they are today. These emeralds have been passed down through 4 generations of women in my family, each one understanding their value and their history, but also understanding the importance of discretion and humility. My great-great-grandmother lived through the Great Depression and taught her daughter that true security comes not from flashing wealth, but from preserving it quietly and using it wisely. This philosophy was passed to my grandmother, then to my mother, and finally to me. My mother, Ruth Morrison Blackwood, was an elegant woman who wore her emeralds only on the most special occasions and stored them carefully in a plain wooden jewelry box that looked unremarkable to anyone who didn't know what treasures it contained. She taught me that real wealth whispers while fake wealth shouts, and that the most valuable things in life are often the ones that others overlook or underestimate. When my mother passed away 15 years ago, she left me the complete emerald collection, along with detailed documentation of each piece's provenance and history. The collection includes necklaces, earrings, bracelets, and brooches that span over a century of careful acquisition and preservation. Some pieces are ornate Victorian designs, while others are more modern settings that my grandmother and mother had commissioned over the years. Each piece tells a story of the strong women who wore it and protected it for future generations. I have never had the collection formally appraised, though my mother had mentioned years ago that it was worth more than most people make in a lifetime. I've worn pieces occasionally over the years, to my wedding, to Harold's retirement party, to special anniversary dinners, but I've always been discreet about their value. Most people who saw me wearing them assumed they were nice costume jewelry or perhaps modest heirloom pieces with more sentimental than monetary worth. Harold knew about the emeralds and respected my family's tradition of discretion about wealth. He never pressured me to sell pieces or to live more extravagantly because of them. We built our life together based on his income as a high school principal and my work as a part-time bookkeeper, treating the emeralds as a safety net that we hoped never to need. Harold often joked that I was like a secret millionaire hiding in plain sight, but he said it with the understanding that our quiet life was more valuable than any amount of money we could have flaunted. Our son Marcus is 34 years old and works as a software engineer in Burlington, about an hour away from Millbrook. Marcus is a good man with a kind heart, but he's always been somewhat naive about people's motivations and easily influenced by those who seem confident and assertive. He inherited his father's gentle nature and his tendency to avoid conflict, which has served him well in many areas of life, but has also made him vulnerable to manipulation by people who are more aggressive or demanding than he is. Marcus has been married for 2 years to Brianna, a 29-year-old woman who works in marketing for a mid-sized company in Burlington. Brianna grew up in an upper-middle-class family in Connecticut and has very specific ideas about what constitutes an appropriate lifestyle for someone of her social standing. She drives a luxury SUV, carries designer handbags, and seems to measure success primarily through material possessions and social status. From the beginning of their relationship, I sensed that Brianna had some concerns about Marcus's family background and financial prospects. She never said anything directly critical, but her comments about our quaint little town and my charming vintage style carried undertones of condescension that made me uncomfortable. She seemed to view my modest lifestyle as a reflection of limited resources rather than deliberate choices about how to live meaningfully. Brianna has made several comments over the past 2 years about how she wishes Marcus came from a family with more financial stability and social connections. She's mentioned multiple times that her parents were able to help her and her siblings with major purchases like houses and cars, and she seems frustrated that Marcus doesn't have similar family support. What she doesn't realize is that I could easily provide such support if it were needed and requested respectfully, but her entitled attitude and demanding tone have made me reluctant to reveal the true extent of my family's resources. The tension between Brianna and me has been building steadily since their wedding, particularly around holidays and family gatherings, when she seems to feel that my contributions to family celebrations are insufficient or insufficiently expensive. She's made comments about my simple gifts and has suggested that I should be doing more to help them achieve their financial goals, particularly as they plan for their future and talk about buying a larger house or starting a family. My relationship with Marcus has become strained as he tries to balance his loyalty to me with his desire to keep peace with his wife. I can see that he's uncomfortable with some of Brianna's comments and demands, but he lacks the confidence to stand up to her directly. Instead, he tries to smooth things over by making excuses for both of us and hoping that time will improve our relationship. What Brianna doesn't understand is that her constant criticism and sense of entitlement have actually pushed me further away from any desire to help her financially. If she had approached our relationship with respect and genuine affection, I might have considered sharing some of my family's wealth to help them build their future. Instead, her behavior has convinced me that she would not use such resources wisely or appreciate their significance. The jewelry collection sits in my bedroom, stored in the same plain wooden box my mother used, looking to casual observers like a collection of outdated costume pieces that an elderly woman keeps for sentimental reasons. Brianna has seen me wear pieces from the collection and has made dismissive comments about my old-fashioned taste and my attachment to cheap jewelry that I should consider updating or replacing with more modern pieces. Little does she know that she's been looking at emeralds that could fund her dream lifestyle 10 times over, or that her casual dismissal of my junk jewelry has been noted and remembered by a woman who learned long ago that patience and discretion are more powerful than immediate reaction. The story I'm about to tell you began on a spring afternoon when Brianna's demands finally crossed a line that forced me to decide whether to continue hiding my family's legacy or to teach her a lesson about assumptions, respect, and the true nature of value that she would never forget. Life in Millbrook moves at a gentle pace that suits me perfectly. My days follow a comfortable routine that brings me peace and keeps me connected to my community without the stress and complexity that seemed to define Harold's in my earlier years when we were building careers and raising Marcus. At 67, I've earned the right to live simply and focus on the things that bring me genuine joy. My work at the Millbrook Public Library is one of those joys. The library is housed in a beautiful brick building that was constructed in 1923 with funds donated by a local family who believed that access to knowledge should be available to everyone regardless of their economic circumstances. The building has tall windows that let in wonderful natural light, hardwood floors that creak pleasantly underfoot, and the kind of quiet atmosphere that makes people naturally speak in hushed, respectful tones. As the part-time community outreach coordinator, I organize book clubs for different age groups, coordinate with local schools for reading programs, and help maintain our local history collection. The work allows me to use skills I developed during my years as a bookkeeper, while also contributing to something meaningful in my community. My colleagues are lovely people who appreciate my reliability and organizational abilities, and I enjoy the daily interactions with patrons who range from young mothers bringing their toddlers for story time to elderly residents researching their family genealogies. The library job pays me about $1,200 a month, which most people assume is my primary source of income. Combined with what they know about Harold's teacher's pension, our neighbors probably estimate my total monthly income at around $3,000, enough to live modestly in a small Vermont town, but not enough for any luxuries or extravagances. This assumption works perfectly for me, as it allows me to live authentically without attracting unwanted attention or requests for financial assistance from people whose motivations I might question. My daily routine begins with coffee on my front porch, where I can watch the sunrise over the mountains and plan my day in peaceful solitude. I tend to my flower gardens, which have become somewhat famous in our neighborhood for their beautiful displays of perennials that bloom in succession from early spring through late fall. Gardening was a hobby that Harold and I shared, and maintaining these gardens feels like a way of honoring his memory while creating something beautiful that the whole neighborhood can enjoy. 3 days a week, I drive my reliable Toyota to the library, where I work from 10 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. The schedule gives me time for other activities while still providing the structure and social connection that I need to feel purposeful and engaged. On my non-work days, I volunteer at the local food bank, participate in a book club with other women my age, and sometimes drive to Burlington to visit Marcus and Brianna, or to run errands that require access to larger stores. My relationship with Marcus has always been close and affectionate. He was an easy child to raise, curious, kind, and responsible without being overly serious or anxious. As an adult, he's maintained those qualities while developing into a successful professional who is respected by his colleagues and valued by his employer. Marcus has a good salary as a software engineer, and he's always been responsible with money in the way that Harold and I taught him. However, since his marriage to Brianna, I've noticed changes in Marcus that concern me. He seems more stressed about money than he used to be, despite earning more than he ever has before. He's mentioned several times that Brianna has expensive tastes and specific expectations about their lifestyle that require careful budgeting and planning. While I appreciate that couples need to work together on financial goals, I'm concerned that Marcus is feeling pressured to provide a standard of living that doesn't align with his natural values or financial comfort zone. Brianna's background is quite different from our family's approach to money and status. She grew up in Westport, Connecticut, where her father works as a corporate lawyer, and her mother is involved in various social organizations and charity boards. Brianna has told me stories about her childhood that involve country club memberships, private school educations, European family vacations, and the expectation that success should be visible and publicly acknowledged. When Brianna talks about her family's lifestyle, I can hear a subtle criticism of the way Marcus and I approach life. She seems to believe that people who have money should display it appropriately, and that choosing to live modestly when you could afford to live luxuriously is somehow dishonest or misguided. She's made several comments about how she doesn't understand why people pretend to be poor when they could be enjoying the benefits of their resources. These conversations make me uncomfortable because they reveal a fundamental difference in our values about wealth, status, and what constitutes a meaningful life. Brianna seems to equate financial success with moral virtue and social worth, while I was raised to believe that true character is demonstrated through humility, generosity, and contribution to others rather than through conspicuous consumption. The tension between these different philosophies has become more apparent as Brianna has begun making direct comments about my lifestyle and choices. She suggested that I should treat myself to a newer car, nicer clothes, or home renovations that would bring my house into the 21st century. While these suggestions might be well-intentioned, they're delivered with an underlying impatience that suggests she views my modest lifestyle as stubborn or misguided, rather than as a conscious choice. More concerning to me are the comments Brianna has made about my reluctance to contribute more significantly to Marcus and her financial goals. She's mentioned that her parents helped her and her siblings with down payments for houses, wedding expenses, and other major purchases, and she seems to expect that I should be providing similar assistance to Marcus. When I haven't volunteered such help, she's become increasingly direct about suggesting that I should be doing more to support their plans for the future. "Marcus is your only child," she said during one particularly uncomfortable conversation. "Shouldn't you want to help him get ahead in life while you're still around to see him benefit from it?" The comment stung because it implied that I don't care about Marcus's well-being, or that I'm being selfish with resources that should rightfully be shared with him. What Brianna doesn't understand is that I would be happy to help Marcus with legitimate needs if he approached me respectfully, and if I believed the assistance would be used wisely. However, her demanding tone and sense of entitlement have made me reluctant to reveal the extent of my ability to provide such help. I've also become concerned about what kind of person Brianna might become if she knew about my family's emerald collection. Her current behavior toward me is based on the assumption that I have limited resources and am choosing to be stingy with them. If she knew that I actually have access to significant wealth, I worry that her demands and expectations would become even more aggressive and manipulative. My emerald collection represents more than just financial assets. It represents a family legacy of strong women who understood the importance of discretion, wisdom, and using resources responsibly. The emeralds have been preserved for 4 generations, not so they could be sold to fund someone's extravagant lifestyle, but so they could provide security and opportunity for family members who truly needed help and would appreciate the significance of what they were receiving. I keep the collection in my bedroom, stored in the same wooden jewelry box that my mother and grandmother used. The box itself is beautiful but unassuming, made of cherry wood with simple brass hardware and a plain interior lined with faded blue velvet. To someone who doesn't know what's inside, it looks like the kind of jewelry box that might contain a few pieces of modest inherited jewelry that an elderly woman keeps for sentimental reasons. Brianna has seen the box and has made dismissive comments about my vintage jewelry and my attachment to old-fashioned styles that are no longer fashionable or valuable. She's suggested that I should consider selling some of my inherited pieces and using the money to buy more modern jewelry that would be more appropriate for someone of my age and social position. These comments reveal not only her ignorance about the true nature of what she's dismissing, but also her fundamental misunderstanding of value, history, and the significance of family legacy. She sees my emeralds as outdated costume jewelry because she lacks the knowledge and experience to recognize real quality and craftsmanship. Her dismissive attitude toward my cheap jewelry has been noted and remembered, and it's about to become very relevant to our family dynamics. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would change everything between us, though neither Brianna nor Marcus had any idea what was coming. All they knew was that I was a modest widow with limited resources, who was being unreasonably stingy about helping them achieve their financial goals. They were about to learn that assumptions can be very dangerous things, especially when they're made about people who have learned the value of patience, discretion, and choosing exactly the right moment to reveal the truth. The first serious crack in my relationship with Brianna appeared 6 months ago, when she and Marcus announced their decision to renew their wedding vows with a much larger ceremony than their original modest courthouse wedding. What started as a sweet idea to celebrate their marriage with friends and family who hadn't been able to attend their small ceremony quickly escalated into something far more elaborate and expensive than anyone had anticipated. "We want to do it right this time," Brianna explained during a Sunday dinner at my house. "Our first wedding was so rushed and small. We deserve to have the celebration we always dreamed of." I understood the sentiment and was initially supportive of the idea. Harold and I had also had a small wedding due to budget constraints, and there had been times over the years when I wished we could have celebrated with a larger gathering of friends and family. However, as Brianna began describing her vision for the vow renewal ceremony, it became clear that this was going to be much more than a simple celebration. She wanted a destination wedding at a resort in the Berkshires, with accommodations for 50 guests, a full dinner reception, professional photography, live music, and all the traditional elements of a formal wedding, including new rings, a designer dress, and elaborate floral arrangements. When Marcus mentioned that the estimated cost would be around $30,000, I nearly choked on my coffee. $30,000 for a vow renewal? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. That's quite an investment for one day. "Mom, it's not just one day," Marcus said defensively. "It's a celebration of our marriage and our commitment to each other. Brianna has been planning this for months, and we think it's important to mark this milestone in our relationship." Brianna jumped in with a tone that suggested I was being unreasonably negative about their plans. "Evelyn, some things are worth spending money on. This is about celebrating love and bringing our families together. I would think you'd be more supportive of something so meaningful." Her use of the word meaningful to describe a $30,000 party bothered me, but I tried to keep my concerns to myself. Over the following weeks, however, the cost of their celebration continued to climb as Brianna added more elements and upgraded various aspects of the event. The final price tag had reached nearly $80,000, which was more than Marcus's annual salary after taxes. When I asked Marcus how they planned to finance such an expensive event, his answer revealed the source of growing tension in our relationship. "We're hoping family will help contribute," he said awkwardly. "Brianna's parents are paying for about half, and we're looking for ways to cover the rest." The expectation was clear, even though it wasn't stated directly. They wanted me to contribute a significant amount of money to help fund this extravagant celebration, and my reluctance to volunteer such assistance was becoming a source of conflict between us. Brianna's approach to requesting my financial support became increasingly direct and demanding over the following months. What started as hints and suggestions evolved into more aggressive pressure tactics that made me very uncomfortable. "Evelyn, I know you're probably concerned about spending your savings," she said during one particularly tense conversation. "But this is a once-in-a-lifetime event. Surely you can find a way to help us make it special." When I explained that $80,000 was far beyond what I could comfortably contribute to any event, Brianna's response revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of my financial situation and her growing frustration with what she perceived as my selfishness. "You own your house outright, you have Harold's pension, and you've been saving money for years. I'm not asking you to go into debt, but you could certainly contribute $10,000 or $15,000 without it affecting your lifestyle." Her assumption that I should liquidate my savings to fund her party was presumptuous and offensive. But what bothered me more was her entitled attitude and her apparent belief that my money was partially hers by virtue of her marriage to my son. "Brianna, I need to maintain my financial security," I said firmly. "At my age, unexpected expenses can arise, and I can't spend my savings on discretionary expenses, no matter how meaningful they might be to you." Her response was immediate and harsh. "Discretionary? This is your son's happiness we're talking about. What could be more important than supporting Marcus and helping us build a strong marriage?" The conversation escalated from there, with Brianna becoming increasingly emotional and accusatory. She suggested that I was being selfish and that my reluctance to help them was evidence that I didn't truly care about Marcus's happiness or their future together. She compared me unfavorably to her own parents, who she claimed would do anything to support their children's important life events. "Maybe if you spent less money on old junk and outdated decorations, you'd have more to help the people who actually matter in your life," she said, gesturing around my living room with obvious disdain. The old junk she was referring to included some beautiful antiques that Harold and I had collected over the years, as well as family heirlooms that had been passed down through generations. Her dismissive attitude toward things that held deep sentimental value for me was hurtful and revealing about her character and values. Over the following weeks, Brianna's pressure tactics became more sophisticated and manipulative. She began making comments about how disappointed Marcus was in my lack of support, suggesting that my refusal to contribute was damaging my relationship with my son. She implied that other family members were questioning my priorities and wondering why I was being so difficult about helping with such an important event. "Marcus is really hurt that you won't help us," she said during one phone call. "He's starting to think you don't approve of our marriage or that you don't want us to be happy." These comments were particularly painful because they attacked my relationship with Marcus and suggested that my financial boundaries were being interpreted as emotional rejection. I knew that Brianna was manipulating the situation to pressure me into compliance, but I also worried that Marcus might genuinely be feeling hurt or confused by my position. The tension reached a breaking point during a family dinner at Marcus and Brianna's apartment 3 months ago. Brianna had invited me ostensibly to discuss wedding plans, but it quickly became clear that the real purpose was to present me with a detailed breakdown of expenses and a specific request for $20,000 in financial assistance. "We've done all the math, and this is what we need to make everything work," Brianna said, sliding a spreadsheet across the table toward me. $20,000 from you, combined with what my parents are contributing and what we've saved, will cover everything. The presentation was clearly designed to make their request seem reasonable and well-planned, but the underlying assumption that I would provide such a large sum of money without being consulted about the planning process was presumptuous and offensive. "Brianna, I haven't agreed to contribute any specific amount to your celebration," I said carefully. $20,000 is a significant sum of money that I would need to consider very carefully. Her response was immediate and angry. "Consider? Evelyn, this is your son's wedding. What is there to consider? Either you support our marriage or you don't." When I tried to explain that my financial support wasn't a measure of my emotional support for their relationship, Brianna became increasingly aggressive and personal in her attacks. "You live in that house filled with worthless old stuff, driving a car that's falling apart, wearing clothes that went out of style 20 years ago. You're sitting on money that could help your son build a future, but you're too selfish to spend it on anything meaningful." The conversation escalated until Brianna was shouting at me about my cheap lifestyle and my hoarding of money that should be shared with family. Marcus tried to calm her down, but his attempts at peacekeeping only seemed to anger her more. "Don't defend her, Marcus. She's being selfish and stubborn, and she's ruining our wedding because she won't part with money she's never going to spend anyway." It was during this tirade that Brianna made the comment that would change everything between us. In her anger and frustration, she grabbed my purse from the counter and started pulling out items, including the small jewelry pouch I always carry, with a few simple pieces I might want to wear during the day. "Look at this junk!" she shouted, holding up my grandmother's emerald earrings. "You wear cheap costume jewelry and carry around worthless trinkets, but you won't help us pay for something important. Your dead mother's junk isn't worth the box it's stored in." The emerald earrings she was waving around dismissively were worth more than her car, but she had no idea what she was holding or what she had just revealed about her character and values. In that moment, I realized that Brianna would never understand or appreciate the true meaning of family legacy, discretion, or the difference between real value and flashy displays of wealth. I took the earrings back from her gently, placed them in my purse, and stood up to leave. "I think this conversation is over," I said calmly. "Marcus, call me when you're ready to discuss this situation more respectfully." As I drove home that night, I made a decision that would change everything. It was time for Brianna to learn exactly what she had been calling worthless junk, and it was time for me to stop hiding my family's legacy to accommodate her ignorance and greed. The emeralds had been waiting patiently for the right moment to reveal themselves. That moment was finally approaching. The morning after Brianna's outburst about my worthless junk, I woke up with a clarity of purpose that I hadn't felt in months. For too long I had been allowing her assumptions and demands to dictate the terms of our relationship, trying to keep peace and avoid conflict for Marcus's sake. But her cruel comments about my mother's jewelry and her complete dismissal of things that held deep meaning for my family had crossed a line that I could no longer ignore. I sat on my front porch with my morning coffee, watching the sunrise paint the Vermont mountains in shades of pink and gold, and thought about my mother's words from so many years ago. "Evelyn, there will come a time when someone will test your patience and your values. When that time comes, remember that showing someone their ignorance isn't cruel, it's educational." My mother had been a wise woman who understood that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to help them understand the consequences of their assumptions and behavior. Brianna had been making increasingly aggressive demands based on her belief that I was a poor widow clinging to worthless possessions out of stubbornness or sentimentality. It was time for her to learn the truth about what she had been so casually dismissing. The first step in my plan was to get a current professional appraisal of my emerald collection. My mother had mentioned years ago that the pieces were valuable, but she had never shared specific numbers. and I had never felt the need to know exact values. The emeralds had always been about family history and security rather than monetary worth. However, if I was going to educate Brianna about her assumptions, I needed documentation that would be impossible to dismiss or argue with. I called the Millbrook Library and told my supervisor that I needed to take a few personal days to handle some important family business. Then I carefully packed my entire emerald collection into a small travel case and drove to Burlington, where I had researched and located the most reputable jewelry appraiser in Vermont. Morrison and Associates. Fine Jewelry had been in business for over 40 years and specialized in antique and estate jewelry appraisals. Their website indicated that they worked with insurance companies, estate attorneys, and private collectors who needed accurate valuations for various purposes. I made an appointment with Richard Morrison, the senior appraiser, explaining that I had inherited a collection of emerald jewelry that I needed evaluated for insurance purposes. The Morrison and Associates showroom was elegant, but not ostentatious, with beautiful display cases containing carefully selected pieces that demonstrated the difference between fine jewelry and mass-market accessories. Richard Morrison was a distinguished gentleman in his 60s who greeted me warmly and led me to a private consultation room equipped with specialized lighting and magnification equipment. "Mrs. Hartwell, I understand you have some inherited emerald pieces that you'd like to have appraised," he said, as I carefully unpacked my collection and arranged it on the velvet-lined examination tray he provided. The moment Richard Morrison saw the first piece, my great-great-grandmother's emerald and diamond necklace, his demeanor changed completely. His casual professional manner was replaced by the focused attention of someone who recognized that he was looking at something extraordinary. "Mrs. Hartwell, may I ask where these pieces originated?" he said, picking up a jeweler's loupe to examine the necklace more closely. I explained the history of the collection, including my great-great-grandmother's connection to Scottish gem merchants and the family's tradition of carefully preserving and passing down these pieces through generations of women. Richard Morrison listened intently while examining each piece with the careful attention of someone who understood exactly what he was seeing. "Mrs. Hartwell, I need to be very clear with you about what you have here," he said, after spending nearly 2 hours examining every piece in the collection. "This is not simply a nice collection of inherited jewelry. These are museum-quality emeralds, many of which appear to be Colombian stones from mines that were producing exceptional gems in the late 1800s and early 1900s. He went on to explain that Colombian emeralds from that era were particularly prized because the mining techniques of the time often yielded stones with exceptional clarity and color saturation. The craftsmanship of the settings also indicated that the pieces had been created by master jewelers who understood how to showcase the stone's natural beauty without overwhelming them with unnecessary embellishment. The market for high-quality vintage emeralds has increased significantly in recent years," Richard Morrison continued. "Collectors and investors are particularly interested in pieces with documented provenance and historical significance. Your collection checks all of those boxes." The formal appraisal process took 3 days, during which Richard Morrison photographed each piece, documented its characteristics, researched comparable sales, and consulted with colleagues who specialized in colored gemstones. When he called me to review his findings, his voice carried a mixture of professional excitement and personal amazement. "Mrs. Hartwell, I've been appraising jewelry for 40 years, and this is one of the most significant private collections I've ever had the privilege to evaluate. The total appraised value of your emerald collection is $2,300,000. I had to ask him to repeat the number because I couldn't quite process what he had said. $2.3 million. My mother's casual comment about the collection being worth more than most people make in a lifetime had been a dramatic understatement. Richard Morrison explained that the most valuable single piece was my great-great-grandmother's necklace, which contained a 15-carat emerald surrounded by diamonds in a setting that dated to approximately 1885. That piece alone was appraised at $450,000. The matching earrings, the same earrings that Brianna had dismissed as cheap costume jewelry, were valued at $120,000 each. Mrs. Hartwell, I strongly recommend that you update your homeowner's insurance immediately and consider storing these pieces in a safety deposit box, Richard Morrison said, as he prepared the detailed written appraisal that would serve as official documentation of the collection's value. These emeralds represent a significant financial asset that should be protected accordingly. As I drove home from Burlington with the appraisal documents in my purse, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. I was amazed by the extent of my family's legacy and grateful for the generations of women who had preserved these treasures for me. I was also somewhat overwhelmed by the responsibility of owning something so valuable and the decisions I would need to make about its future. But more than anything, I was thinking about Brianna's cruel words and her absolute confidence that she knew exactly what my jewelry was worth. Her dismissive comments about worthless trinkets and cheap costume jewelry were about to be revealed as the ignorant assumptions of someone who had confused flashiness with value and arrogance with knowledge. Over the next few days, I carefully considered how to handle the situation with Brianna and Marcus. I could simply tell them about the appraisal and let them process the information privately, but that approach wouldn't address the deeper issues of respect and entitlement that had been driving our conflict. Brianna's behavior toward me had been based on her assumption that I was a poor widow who was being unreasonably stingy with limited resources. Simply revealing that I wasn't poor wouldn't necessarily change her fundamental attitude about wealth, entitlement, and respect for others. I decided that the most effective approach would be to let Brianna continue with her current assumptions and demands until she created a situation where the truth would have maximum educational impact. She had been pressuring me to sell my worthless jewelry to contribute to her wedding expenses. Perhaps it was time to let her see exactly what she had been asking me to liquidate to fund her party. The opportunity presented itself when Marcus called to invite me to a family dinner where they planned to discuss the wedding situation and hopefully work out our differences about financial contributions. The invitation was clearly Brianna's idea, and I suspected that she planned to present me with another ultimatum about contributing to their celebration. I accepted the invitation and spent the following week preparing for what I knew would be a confrontation that would change our family dynamics permanently. I had the appraisal documents copied and notarized, and I prepared a small selection of pieces from my collection to bring with me to the dinner. It was time for Brianna to learn that assumptions can be very dangerous things, especially when they're made about people who have spent their entire lives learning the difference between what appears to be valuable and what actually is valuable. The education she was about to receive would be worth far more than the emeralds that would deliver it. The family dinner was scheduled for Sunday evening at Marcus and Brianna's apartment, and I arrived precisely at 6 o'clock, carrying a small leather portfolio and wearing my grandmother's simple emerald bracelet, a piece that Brianna had previously dismissed as outdated costume jewelry during one of her critiques of my fashion choices. Brianna answered the door wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than most people in Millbrook spent on clothing in a year. Her smile was bright but forced, and I could sense the tension beneath her carefully constructed facade of family harmony. "Evelyn, so glad you could make it. Marcus is just finishing up in the kitchen. We're really hoping we can work everything out tonight." The apartment was decorated with expensive furnishings and artwork that showcased Brianna's taste for luxury and status symbols. Everything was beautiful and carefully coordinated, but the overall effect felt more like a showroom than a home where people actually lived and relaxed together. Marcus emerged from the kitchen wearing an apron and looking stressed. He kissed me hello and tried to make pleasant conversation, but I could see that he was dreading the conversation that was planned for after dinner. He had been caught in the middle of our conflict for months, and the strain was showing in his face and manner. During dinner, Brianna made small talk about work and local events, but her underlying agenda was obvious in the way she kept steering the conversation toward topics related to money, family obligations, and the importance of supporting loved ones during major life events. She was building her case methodically, preparing for the main event that would come with dessert. "Evelyn, I've been thinking a lot about our conversation last month," Brianna said as she served coffee and homemade cheesecake. "I know I got emotional, and I want to apologize for some of the things I said, but I also want to help you understand why this wedding renewal is so important to us and why we're hoping you'll reconsider contributing to it." Her apology was clearly calculated to soften my resistance rather than expressing genuine remorse for her behavior. She went on to explain that the wedding renewal represented more than just a party. It was an investment in their marriage and their future as a family. She painted a picture of disappointed relatives, missed opportunities for family bonding, and the lasting regret that would result if financial limitations prevented them from celebrating their love appropriately. "We're not asking you to sacrifice your security," she continued, pulling out the same spreadsheet she had shown me before. "But surely you can find a way to contribute $15,000 without it affecting your lifestyle significantly. You could sell some of your jewelry pieces that you never wear, or perhaps take out a small loan against your house equity." The suggestion that I should mortgage my home to fund her party was breathtaking in its audacity, but I remained calm and listened to her complete presentation. She had clearly spent considerable time preparing her arguments, and she delivered them with the confidence of someone who believed she was being perfectly reasonable in her demands. "I've even researched some estate jewelry buyers who specialize in older pieces," Brianna said, sliding a business card across the table toward me. "This man in Burlington says he's always looking for vintage costume jewelry, and he might give you a few $100s for some of your inherited pieces. Every little bit would help." The business card was for a dealer who specialized in buying estate jewelry from people who didn't know what they owned, the kind of person who made his living taking advantage of widows and heirs who needed quick cash and didn't understand the value of what they were selling. The irony that Brianna was suggesting I sell priceless emeralds to such a person was almost too perfect. "Brianna," I said quietly, "I think there's something you need to understand about my jewelry collection before we go any further with this conversation." I opened my leather portfolio and removed the official appraisal documents that Richard Morrison had prepared. The papers were bound in a professional folder with the Morrison & Associates letterhead clearly visible at the top. "Last week, I had my inherited jewelry collection professionally appraised by the most respected firm in Vermont. I thought it would be helpful to know exactly what we were talking about before making any decisions about selling pieces to fund your celebration." Brianna's expression shifted from confident expectation to confused concern as she realized that I was taking her suggestion seriously, but perhaps not in the way she had intended. "The total appraised value of my mother's jewelry collection," I continued, placing the summary page in front of her, "is $2,300,000. The color drained from Brianna's face as she stared at the document. Marcus leaned over to read the appraisal summary, and I watched his mouth fall open as he processed what he was seeing. "That's impossible," Brianna whispered. "Your jewelry is it's old costume pieces. I've seen what you wear. It's not valuable jewelry." I reached into my purse and carefully removed my grandmother's emerald earrings. The same earrings that Brianna had grabbed and dismissed as worthless junk during our last confrontation. These earrings, I said, placing them gently on the table, are each appraised at $120,000. They contain natural Colombian emeralds that were mined in the 1890s and set in platinum settings created by a master jeweler in Edinburgh. Brianna stared at the earrings with a look of absolute shock and disbelief. The small, seemingly simple pieces that she had handled so carelessly and dismissed so confidently were worth more than most people's annual salaries. "The bracelet I'm wearing tonight," I continued, extending my wrist so she could see it clearly, contains 12 matching emeralds and is valued at $85,000. It was created for my great-grandmother in 1923 as a wedding gift from her husband. Marcus found his voice first. "Mom, I had no idea. Why didn't you ever tell us about this?" "Because," I said, looking directly at Brianna, "I was raised to believe that true wealth whispers while fake wealth shouts. My family has preserved this collection for 4 generations by being discreet about its value and careful about who we trust with knowledge of what we own." I pulled out additional pages from the appraisal, showing detailed photographs and valuations of individual pieces. The necklace that Brianna had seen me wear to their wedding was valued at $450,000. A simple ring that I wore occasionally was worth $60,000. Even the outdated brooch that I had worn to Marcus's graduation was appraised at $45,000. "When you suggested that I sell my jewelry to fund your wedding," I said calmly, "you were asking me to liquidate assets worth more than most people accumulate in their entire lifetimes. When you called my mother's jewelry worthless junk, you were dismissing emeralds that have been in my family for over a century and are considered museum-quality pieces by experts." Brianna's shock was giving way to something that looked like panic as she began to understand the full implications of what she was learning. She had spent months treating me like a stubborn, selfish woman who was hoarding modest resources out of spite. The reality that I possessed wealth far beyond anything she had imagined was clearly overwhelming her ability to process the situation. "But you live so modestly," she said weakly. "Your house, your car, your clothes. You don't live like someone who has money." "No," I agreed. "I live like someone who understands the difference between having wealth and needing to display it. I live like someone who was taught that the most valuable things in life are often the ones that others overlook or underestimate." Marcus was still staring at the appraisal documents, shaking his head in amazement. "Mom, this is incredible. I can't believe you've been carrying around jewelry worth more than our house." "The emeralds have always been about family legacy and security," I explained. "They were never meant to be sold to fund parties or vacations or lifestyle upgrades. They were preserved so that future generations would have real security if they ever faced genuine emergencies or opportunities that required significant resources." I looked directly at Brianna, who was still staring at the earrings on the table as if she couldn't quite believe they were real. "Brianna, you spent months assuming that I was being selfish, with limited resources. You dismissed my jewelry as cheap costume pieces and suggested that I was too stubborn or sentimental to sell worthless trinkets to help fund your celebration. You were wrong about everything." The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable. Brianna seemed unable to speak, and Marcus was clearly struggling to process both the revelation about my wealth and the implications of his wife's behavior toward me. "The truly sad part," I continued, "is that if you had approached me with respect and genuine affection, if you had treated me as a valued family member rather than as an obstacle to your financial goals, I might have considered helping you create a beautiful celebration of your marriage. Instead, your sense of entitlement and your dismissive attitude toward things you didn't understand have shown me exactly what kind of person you are." I carefully replaced the earrings in my purse and gathered the appraisal documents. "I won't be contributing to your wedding renewal," I said firmly. "Not because I can't afford it, but because I don't believe you would use such a gift wisely or appreciate its significance. You've shown me that you equate love with money and respect with financial contributions. Those are not values I choose to support." As I stood to leave, I looked at Marcus with genuine sadness. "Son, I love you, and I will always be here if you need me for anything important. But I hope you'll think carefully about what you've learned tonight about assumptions, respect, and the kind of person you want to build a life with." The revelation that would change everything had been delivered. Now it was time to see what they would do with the truth. The week following the dinner revelation was one of the strangest and most emotionally complex periods of my life. I had spent months being treated as a selfish, stubborn widow who was withholding modest resources from her family out of spite or misplaced priorities. In one evening, that narrative had been completely destroyed, replaced by the reality that I was a woman of significant means who had been carefully observing and evaluating how others treated her when they believed she had nothing to offer them. The immediate aftermath was a series of frantic phone calls from Marcus, who seemed to be struggling with multiple layers of shock and confusion. He called Tuesday morning, Wednesday evening, and again on Friday, each time with a slightly different emotional tone as he processed what he had learned and what it meant for our family relationships. "Mom, I keep thinking about that dinner, and I have so many questions," he said during our longest conversation. "Why didn't you ever tell me about the emeralds? Did Dad know? And what does this mean for us going forward?" I explained that Harold had known about the collection and had respected my family's tradition of discretion about wealth. We had built our life together based on his income and my modest earnings, treating the emeralds as a safety net that we hoped never to need, rather than as assets to be spent on lifestyle upgrades or luxuries. "Your father understood that the emeralds represented security and legacy," I told Marcus. "We both believed that you would inherit them eventually, but we wanted you to build your own life and develop your own values without the distraction of knowing about significant family wealth." Marcus struggled with this explanation, wondering if we had somehow cheated him out of opportunities or advantages that the emeralds could have provided during his education or early career. I tried to help him understand that his character, work ethic, and genuine accomplishments were more valuable than anything money could have purchased for him. "Son, you became a successful, respected professional because of your own abilities and efforts. You developed good values and strong character because that's who you are, not because of financial pressure or privilege. I'm proud of the man you became when you thought you were building your future entirely through your own efforts." The more complex challenge was dealing with Brianna's reaction to the revelation. She had been completely silent for 3 days after the dinner, apparently unable to process the complete reversal of everything she had believed about our family's financial situation. When she finally called me, her voice was shaky and uncertain in a way I had never heard before. "Evelyn, I don't know what to say. I feel like I've been living in some kind of alternate reality for the past 2 years. Everything I thought I knew about you and your situation was completely wrong." Her attempt at an apology was hesitant and confused, filled with explanations about her own family background and expectations that she seemed to think would excuse her behavior toward me. She talked about growing up in a family where financial status was openly discussed and displayed, and how she had assumed that people who lived modestly were doing so because they had no other choice. "I never meant to be disrespectful," she said, though her tone suggested she was still struggling to fully understand why her behavior had been problematic. "I just thought you were being stubborn about money that could have helped us, and I got frustrated because I couldn't understand why you wouldn't want to support Marcus's happiness." What became clear during this conversation was that Brianna was less concerned about having misjudged my character than she was about having missed an opportunity to access family wealth that could have funded her lifestyle aspirations. Her apology focused more on her regret about misunderstanding our financial situation than on her dismissive treatment of things that held deep meaning for me. "Does this mean you might reconsider helping with the wedding renewal?" she asked toward the end of our conversation. "I mean, now that I understand that you can afford it?" The question revealed that Brianna had completely missed the point of my revelation. She still believed that my refusal to fund her celebration had been about financial limitations, rather than about her behavior and values. The discovery that I could afford to pay for her entire wedding hadn't prompted any deeper reflection about respect, entitlement, or the way she had treated me as a person. "Brianna," I said carefully, "my ability to afford something has never been the issue. The issue is whether supporting your choices would be a wise use of family resources, and whether your behavior toward me suggests that you would appreciate and respect such support." She seemed genuinely confused by this response, as if the idea that wealth came with responsibilities and judgments about worthiness had never occurred to her. In her mind, having money meant spending it on the things and people you cared about, regardless of whether such spending encouraged positive or negative behavior in others. Over the following months, the dynamics in our family shifted dramatically as Marcus and Brianna struggled to adjust to their new understanding of our financial situation. Marcus seemed to develop a new respect for my judgment and discretion, often calling to ask my advice about financial decisions or career choices in ways he had never done before. "I keep thinking about how you and Dad built your life together without relying on the emeralds," he said during one of our conversations. "It makes me realize that we've been approaching some of our own financial decisions incorrectly, focusing too much on what we want rather than what we can actually afford." Brianna's adjustment was more difficult and less successful. She seemed unable to reconcile my modest lifestyle with my significant wealth, frequently making comments about how I should be living differently or enjoying my resources more openly. She continued to pressure me about contributing to their various financial goals, but now her arguments were based on my ability to afford such contributions rather than on family obligation or emotional blackmail. The marriage between Marcus and Brianna began showing serious strain as the truth about my emeralds forced them to confront some fundamental differences in their values and expectations. Marcus had always been somewhat uncomfortable with Brianna's expensive tastes and social ambitions, but he had assumed that her behavior toward me was motivated by legitimate concerns about our family's financial limitations. Learning that her demands and criticism had been based on greed rather than necessity changed his perspective about her character significantly. The final break came 6 months after the dinner revelation, when Brianna made one last attempt to pressure me into funding their lifestyle aspirations. She had researched the current market value of high-quality emeralds and presented me with information about auction houses and private dealers who specialized in selling estate jewelry to wealthy collectors. "Evelyn, you're 77 years old," she said during what would be our last serious conversation. "What are you saving this jewelry for? You could sell just a few pieces and completely transform your life and ours. You could travel, upgrade your house, help us buy a bigger place, and start a family. Isn't that what family wealth is supposed to be for?" Her fundamental misunderstanding of the emerald's significance and her continued focus on spending rather than preserving family resources confirmed everything I had learned about her character and values over the past 2 years. "Brianna," I said firmly, "the emeralds are not my personal treasure to be spent on whatever seems appealing at the moment. They are a family legacy that has been preserved for 4 generations and will hopefully be preserved for future generations. They represent security, history, and the wisdom of women who understood that real wealth is about what you preserve, not what you spend. Marcus filed for divorce 3 weeks later, telling me that he had finally understood the difference between loving someone and being compatible with their fundamental values about money, family, and respect for others. The divorce was finalized quietly, with Brianna receiving a modest settlement that reflected their brief marriage and Marcus's desire to move forward without further conflict. I realized that if she couldn't respect you when she thought you had nothing, she would never truly respect anyone, Marcus explained. I want to build a life with someone who understands that how you treat people says more about your character than how much money you have or spend. Today, our relationship is stronger and more honest than it has ever been. Marcus has developed a deep appreciation for the values that guided my family's approach to wealth and discretion. He often visits me in Millbrook, and we spend time talking about family history, the significance of the Emerald Collection, and the lessons that can be learned from the way different people react to wealth and poverty. I have updated my will to ensure that the emeralds will pass to Marcus when I'm gone, along with detailed documentation about their history and significance. I've also established a scholarship fund for students from working-class families who demonstrate both academic excellence and strong character values. The fund is modest, funded by my library salary and Harold's pension rather than by selling emeralds, but it serves an important purpose in helping young people achieve their educational goals through their own efforts. The emeralds remain in their simple wooden box in my bedroom, looking to casual observers like a collection of outdated costume jewelry that an elderly woman keeps for sentimental reasons. They continue to serve their intended purpose, providing security, preserving family legacy, and teaching valuable lessons about the difference between what appears to be valuable and what actually is valuable. I learned that revealing the truth about wealth and character can be one of the most powerful tools available to someone who has spent their life observing human nature. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the opportunity to show you exactly who they are when they believe you have nothing to offer them. And sometimes the most valuable lesson you can teach is that assumptions about other people's worth, financial or otherwise, can be very dangerous things indeed.